Today I'm going to tell you a story so still, so heavy with silence. It can make a grown man hold his breath. Out in the high desert of the Apache lands, where the wind dies without warning and the ground remembers every wrong step, two worlds brushed against each other, one carrying rifles and deeds of sale, the other carrying bones that must never be named. It began with a single misplaced footprint in near stones no one was ever supposed to touch. One small violation, one heartbeat of wrongness. And from that moment, a man who had spent his life staying unseen was forced to stand in plain sight. And everything he was began to burn. The sun hung low, a dull copper coin above the rim rock, throwing long shadows across the dry wash. Talon stood alone on the high ground boots, planted in the red dust coat, open to the thin wind that had died an hour ago. Below him, the narrow canyon folded into itself, the sacred spring reduced to a dark stain in the gravel. The burial place of the old ones lay hidden there, under flat stones no taller than a man's knee. No marker, no name spoken, only the knowing of the ground. The birds had stopped, not gradually, all at once. No hawk cry, no quail rustle. The silence pressed against his ears like wet clay. Talon did not move. His right hand rested loose near the knife hilt, not reaching just there. His eyes followed the single line of boot prints, square-toed, heavy-heeled cutting across the talus slope, where no Apache would step. The tracks stopped short of the stones, then veered away, as if the man who made them had felt something shift under his weight and thought better of it. Near the largest flat rock, a small white fragment lay turned over, no bigger than a thumbnail. Bone, old bone, sun-bleached, until it was almost chalk. Talon knew the shape without touching it, part of a finger joint from one of the grandfathers who had carried the people through the long hunger winters before the Iron Road came. Someone had lifted the stone, set it down wrong. The wrongness sat in the air, thick as smoke you cannot see. He breathed once slow. The smell of dry sage and alkali dust filled his chest, but underneath it, something else, faint metal gun oil sweat, not yet gone cold. White man smell. Recent. Talon crouched. His shadow fell across the stone. He did not speak the name that should never be spoken again. He did not curse. He simply reached fingertips, brushing the bone fragment, turning it back the way it had lain for generations. The contact was light, almost nothing. Yet the moment his skin met the relic, the canyon seemed to lean in, listening. A pebble loosened somewhere higher, rattled down the slope, and stopped. That was all. He rose. The wind stayed gone. The birds stayed gone. His pulse beat steady against the collarbone, but the old ease was missing now. The quiet certainty that this place would keep its own secrets. It would not. Not anymore. Far down the wash, a thin column of dust, lifted horses moving slow-headed toward the town. Talon watched them until the dust settled again into stillness. Then he turned uphill boots, scuffing softly coat, flapping once against his thighs. He did not hurry. There was no place to hurry to. Behind him, the canyon held its breath. The small white bone lay exactly as the grandfathers had left it. But the ground remembered the stranger's touch, and the ground does not forgive. Talon reached the crest and paused. From here he could see the faint scar of the new wagon road the white men had cut last spring, and beyond it, the low shapes of redstone gulch roofs, catching the last slant of light. Somewhere in that scatter of wood and iron, a woman lived alone, gathering plants, healing children who were not hers. He had seen her twice from distance. Once she had looked up straight at him and held his gaze for 3 heartbeats before turning away. He did not know her name. He did not need to. But the tracks he had followed led in that direction. The sun dropped behind the rim. Shadows swallowed the canyon whole. Talon started down the far slope, moving quiet, as a man already carrying more weight than one pair of shoulders should bear. The fire in the center of the camp burned low, fed only by the dry ends of mesquite branches that cracked like small bones when they gave up their heat. Talon came down the last slope in the gray hour before full dark boots, soft on the packed earth coat, heavy with dust from the high ground. The smell of piñon smoke clung to him, mixed with the faint metallic bite of alkali on his skin. Inside the circle of wick-eye-ups, Sage knelt beside a low pallet, where a boy of perhaps 7 winters lay wrapped in a blanket too thin for the night chill. The child's breathing rattled shallow and wet at each exhale, ending in a cough that shook his small frame. Sage dipped a cloth in a gourd of water from the spring and pressed it to the boy's forehead. Her hands moved steady, but her shoulders were set hard the way they set when she knew something was wrong, and no one would say it aloud. Talon stopped at the edge of the firelight. The other women glanced up once, then away. An old man Stone sat cross-legged on a blanket farther back, staring into the coals as if they owed him answers. He did not look at Talon. No one did. Sage rose without hurry. She walked to him, stopping close enough that he could smell the sage leaves she had crushed earlier on her palms. Her eyes searched his face the way a hawk searches open ground. "The boy is worse," she said. Not a question. Talon nodded once. She waited. The fire popped, sending a small shower of sparks upward. Somewhere in the darkness, a horse stamped and blew. "He coughs blood now," Sage said. "Stone says the grandfathers are angry, that someone touched what should not be touched." Talon's jaw tightened just enough to feel the muscle pull under the skin. He looked past her to the boy. The child's chest rose and fell too fast, too shallow. The cough came again, small and terrible. Sage stepped closer. Her voice dropped. "You were gone long today?" "I walked the high ground," he said. She studied him, and he did not answer. The silence stretched between them, heavy as wet hide. Behind her, Stone shifted the blanket, rustling. A low murmur passed among the women, words too soft to catch. But the tone was the same. Something has returned, something that should have stayed under the stones. Talon felt the weight settle deeper in his chest. If he spoke of the tracks of the bone turned wrong, the men would ride out. They would find the white men, and blood would answer blood. The soldiers would come after. The people would pay in winter hunger and children, taken in land lost, piece by piece. If he stayed silent, the boy might die. Others might follow, and the grandfathers would not rest. Sage waited still. Her eyes did not leave his. He turned his head slightly, looking toward the dark line of the canyon, where the sacred spring lay hidden. The direction was small, almost nothing, a tilt of the chin, but she saw it. She did not ask again. Instead, she reached out, touched his sleeve once light as a falling leaf, then let her hand drop. Talon walked past the fire, past the wicky-ups, out to the edge of camp, where the ground fell away toward the open country. He stopped there, boots in the dust, and stared into the night. The moon was thin, a silver blade, low above the rim rock. Behind him, soft footsteps followed, too soft for an adult. Sage had not come. It was the girl, the small one, who had been watching from the shadows earlier, the one whose name they did not speak aloud because she was still too young for ceremony. She stopped a few paces back, silent. Talon did not turn. He kept his eyes on the dark mouth of the canyon. The girl did not speak. She only watched him, small hands folded in front of her blanket dress. He felt her there, felt the weight of her gaze, like another pair of eyes on the ground he had walked today. The wind started again, faint, carrying the smell of dust and distant smoke. Somewhere far off, a coyote yipped, once then fell quiet. Talon exhaled slowly. The breath misted white for a moment, then vanished. He started walking again toward the high ground he had left at dusk. The girl stayed where she was watching him go. Behind them both in the camp, the boy coughed again, longer this time, wetter. The night closed around Talon's back, like a hand. The moon had not yet risen when Talon left the camp again. He moved down the dry wash on foot, avoiding the horse trails, boots placed careful on loose shale that would not shift under weight. The night air carried the faint iron taste of coming frost, and the smell of distant pinon fires lingered like old breath on the wind. He kept low coat dark against the darker ground, stopping every few paces to listen. Nothing answered but the soft scrape of his own breathing. He reached the low ridge overlooking the edge of Redstone Gulch, just as the first gray light bled into the east. Below the town lay quiet roofs of split pine and corrugated tin, catching the pale dawn smoke rising thin from a few chimneys. Closer, where the canyon mouth opened onto flat land, a shallow cut had been made in the earth. Fresh dirt piled beside it, dark and damp. 2 men worked there with shovels, moving slow, deliberate. Vance Crow stood apart, arms folded, watching. His hat sat low, face shadowed, but Talon knew the set of his shoulders the way a man stands when he thinks the ground belongs to him. They were digging near the place where the old burial stones lay half-buried under scrub. Not deep yet. Just enough to test the soil to see if it would give way easy for the ditch they wanted to run water through to the new pasture Cole Barrett had claimed last spring. Talon crouched behind a boulder the size of a horse, close enough to hear the shovels bite gravel, the soft grunt of effort, the occasional curse under breath. Vance Crow spat into the dirt, his voice carried clear in the still air. "Keep at it. We hit water here. Barrett's got his grass by summer. Ain't no ghost gonna stop $1." One of the men, Tuck Riley, thin and quick-eyed, paused, wiped sweat from his brow with a sleeve already black. "Folks say this ground's marked. Apache stuff, bones and such." Vance laughed, once short and dry. "Bones don't own land. And the ones that did," he named a name, then the name of an old man long gone. A grandfather whose resting place should never be spoken. The sound of it fell like a stone into still water. "They ain't here to complain no more." Talon's hand closed on the boulder's rough edge. The rock bit into his palm, cold and unyielding. Inside his chest, something tightened, not anger exactly, but the slow burn of knowing a line had been crossed that could not be uncrossed. The name hung in the air a moment. Then Vance turned his back and walked a few steps, boots crunching fresh-turned earth. Talon stayed motionless. He could step out now, show himself, make them stop with nothing more than presence. But the camp would know he had come here alone, near white men, near the place of the dead. Stone would call it betrayal. Sage would look at him the way she had looked last night. Doubt, not yet accusation, but close. And if blood answered blood tonight, the soldiers would ride out tomorrow. So he watched. The shovels rose and fell. Dirt piled higher. Vance paced restless, glancing toward the town as if measuring time. Talon's pulse beat steady against his throat. He told himself the digging might stop on its own. The ground might prove too hard, the water too deep. He told himself he could still walk away clean. Then a small sound behind him, soft footfall too light for a man. He turned his head slow. The girl stood 20 paces back, blanket dress pale against the rock, eyes wide. She had followed him again, silent as shadow. She saw him see her. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Then she turned and ran, small legs carrying her uphill toward camp blanket flapping like a broken wing. Talon did not call after her. He looked back down at the diggers. Vance Crow had not heard. The shovels kept their rhythm. The first edge of sun cleared the rim rock, throwing long gold light across the violated ground. Talon exhaled, once slow, the breath visible for a moment in the cold air. He rose careful and started back the way he had come. Behind him, the shovels rang on stone. Ahead, the girl's footsteps faded into silence. The camp would hear soon enough. The sun stood straight overhead, a white-hot eye that burned away any shadow worth hiding in. The camp had drawn into a tight circle around the central fire pit. Though no wood burned, now only ash gray, and still stirred by the occasional hot gust off the flats. People sat on blankets or bare earth knees, drawn-up faces set hard. The smell of sun-baked canvas and unwashed wool hung thick, undercut by the sour edge of sickness that had settled into the wickiups like damp rot. Talon stood at the outer edge, coat open, arms loose at his sides. He had not been summoned. He had simply come when the murmurs started, knowing the girl's footsteps would lead here sooner or later. Stone sat in the place of speaking back straight, despite the years that had bent it. His hands rested, palms down on his thighs, fingers spread as if pressing the earth to keep it from shifting. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. The child spoke, he said. She saw a man of the people near the stones of the grandfathers. She saw him watch while white hands turned the dirt. A low sound moved through the circle, not words, just breath held too long and let go again. Heads turned, eyes found Talon and stayed. The girl's small blanket, still clutched in one fist, stood beside Sage. She did not look up. Her gaze stayed fixed on a crack in the ground between her bare feet. When Stone nodded once, she spoke, voice thin but clear. I followed him. He stood on the ridge. He watched them dig. He did not stop them. The words fell flat into the silence. No one moved. The wind moved the canvas walls of the nearest wickiup with a soft slap like a hand testing a door. Sage kept her eyes on the ash. Her shoulders had drawn in tight. She did not look at Talon. Stone turned his head slow. You were there, he said. Not a question. Talon met the old man's gaze. He felt the weight of every pair of eyes, some angry, some afraid, most simply waiting. The boy in the nearest wickiup coughed again, long and ragged, the sound carrying across the open ground like a reminder no one needed. Stone waited. Talon could have spoken then. Could have said the name Vance Crow had uttered the violation that still rang in his ears. Could have told them the digging was for water, for grass, for dollars. But the words would have carried the name of the dead across every tongue in camp. Once spoken, it could not be unsaid. The grandfathers would hear. The sickness would have a reason, and the reason would demand blood. So he stood silent. Sage's hands closed into fists on her blanket. She still would not look at him. Stone exhaled through his nose, a sound like dry leaves shifting. A man who stands and watches while the stones are moved is no different from the hand that moves them. The law is not bent by distance. A woman near the back made a small sound, half grief, half fear. Another cough answered from the wickiup, weaker this time. Talon felt the circle tighten without anyone moving. Space opened around him, not wide, but enough. Enough to feel the absence of warmth at his back. Stone rose slow, joints popping like dry wood. He walked past Talon without touching him, without looking at him again. The others followed one by one, women gathering children, men gathering blankets, eyes averted. Sage was last. She paused at the edge of the circle, close enough that Talon could smell the sage she had crushed that morning still on her palms. She lifted her chin, one small sharp, then turned away. Her footsteps were light. They did not hurry. Talon remained where he was. The fire pit smoked faintly, a thin gray thread rising straight up in the windless noon. Around him, the camp emptied, until only the sick boy's breathing and the occasional distant hoarse snort remained. He did not move. He did not speak. The sun slid west a fraction. Shadow began to creep back across the ground. From the direction of the Wikai-ups, another cough, longer, wetter. Talon turned his head toward the sound. His right hand flexed, once fingers curling, then opening again. He stayed standing in the open circle a long time after the last person had gone inside. The ground beneath his boots felt harder than it had that morning, as if it too had drawn away. Somewhere beyond the ridge in the direction of Redstone Gulch, a thin line of dust rose again, horses moving slow. The camp did not call him back. The afternoon heat pressed down like a heavy blanket, thick and unyielding, drawing sweat along Talon's spine beneath the worn cotton shirt. He lay flat on the ridge's lip belly to the warm rock coat folded beside him to keep the dark cloth from catching light. Below, the sacred spring had shrunk to a shallow pool no wider than a man's outstretched arms. The water lay still, now edged with white alkali crust that glittered cruelly in the sun. What had once fed the people through dry seasons now barely wet the gravel. Vance Crow and 4 others worked the far bank. Shovels bit deep, throwing dirt in regular arcs. Cole Barrett was not there. His ranch lay miles east, but his orders were plain in the straight line. They cut a ditch to pull the last of the good water across the flats to grass that would never have grown without it. The men moved without hurry, sleeves rolled, hats low. Tuck Riley paused once to spit, then drove his blade again. The sound carried faint metal on stone metal on earth, steady as a heartbeat. Talon watched. His breath came slow, shallow time to the rhythm of the shovels so no movement would show. The wind had died completely. The only sound was the scrape of steel and the occasional grunt of effort. He could smell the turned soil from here, rich, damp, wrong. It should have stayed covered. The pool shrank another fraction while he lay there. A thin trickle still fed it from the rock face, but the ditch was already pulling that away. Soon there would be nothing left but mud and memory. A small cough drifted up from the camp behind him, sharp, wet, familiar. The girl, the witness, had been coughing since morning. Sage had tried willow bark and steam, but the fever held. Talon knew why. The water they boiled came from this spring. The grandfathers had placed their bones near it, so the people would always drink clean. Now the clean was leaving, and sickness followed. Footsteps approached from behind, light, deliberate. Sage stopped a few paces back, blanket wrapped tight against the heat. She did not crouch beside him. She stood looking down at the same scene he watched. "They take the water," she said. Quiet. No accusation in the words, only fact. Talon did not answer at once. He kept his eyes on Vance Crow, who had paused to wipe his face with a bandana. The man's shirt stuck dark to his back. Sage waited. The silence between them grew heavier than the sun. "Why do you watch?" she asked, finally. "Why not stop them?" Talon felt the question settle in his chest like a stone. If he moved, now stepped out, showed himself, they would see an Apache alone on the ridge. Rifles would come up. Shots might answer. The soldiers would hear. The camp would pay in winter blankets and children gone hungry. If he stayed hidden, the spring would dry. The boy would die. The girl would follow. And the people would have to leave this ground forever. He exhaled once slow. Dust lifted from the rock under his breath. Sage shifted her weight. "The girl asked for you this morning. She said you know things. She wants to know why you do nothing." Talon's fingers curled against stone. He did not look at Sage. He could not. The shame was small private, but it burned steady. Sage waited another long moment. Then she turned and walked back toward camp footsteps, soft on the dry grass. She did not look back. Talon remained flat, unmoving. The shovels kept their rhythm below. The pool shrank again, visible now a darkening ring around the edge. Then movement caught his eye off to the left where the canyon mouth widened into open ground. A woman walked there alone. Dark dress hair pinned simple under a wide hat. Adeline Hargrove. She carried a small basket bent now and then to cut a sprig of desert herb with a short knife. She moved careful, respectful of the ground, but she did not know its name or its laws. She did not know the stones behind her held the bones of grandfathers. She drew closer to the spring, close enough that Vance Crowe would see her soon if he turned. Talon's hand moved to the knife at his belt, not drawing it, just resting there. The metal felt cool against his palm. He could step down now, warn her away. Or he could stay hidden and let her walk into the open ground where white men dug and Apache bones lay exposed. The shovels rang on. The pool shrank. Talon's breath came shallow. He did not move. Yet. The sun had dropped halfway to the rim rock, turning the canyon walls the color of old blood. Talon rose from the ridge in one slow motion coat, hanging open, no rifle, no knife drawn. He stepped down the loose shale slope without hurry boots, sliding once on gravel, then finding purchase. The sound of his descent carried small rocks rolling ahead like warnings. Below, the digging had stopped. Vance Crowe straightened first hand, drifting to the pistol at his hip. Tuck, Riley, and the others froze mid-swing, shovels still buried in earth. Adeline Hargrove stood 30 paces off, basket at her feet, one hand raised halfway to shade her eyes. She had not moved since she first saw him on the ridge. Now she watched without blinking. Talon reached the flat ground at the spring's edge and stopped. He planted his feet wide, blocking the narrow path the ditch would have to follow. No words. No raised hand. Just presence, broad shoulders, squared eyes, fixed on Vance Crowe. The pool behind him lay almost still now, its surface dimpled only by the wind that had started again, low and fitful. Vance studied him a long moment. Then he laughed once short and dry, the sound scraping like metal on stone. "Apache," he said. "Figured one of you'd show sooner or later." Talon did not answer. His breath came even deep. The smell of fresh-turned dirt mixed with horse sweat and gun oil filled the air between them. Tuck Riley shifted eyes, darting to Vance. Boss Vance lifted a hand, slow, deliberate, easy. To Talon, he said, "You're in the wrong place, friend. This ground's spoken for." Talon remained motionless. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint trickle still fighting its way into the shrinking pool. Adeline took one step forward, then stopped. Her hat brim shaded her face, but Talon could see the tension in her shoulders. Vance's patience thinned. "Move, or we move you." Talon did not move. Vance nodded once. Tuck Riley brought the rifle up, slow barrel leveling at Talon's chest. The other two followed suit. Metal clicked, hammers back. Talon felt the shift in the air the way it tightens before a storm. He could step aside, walk back up the ridge, let them finish. The spring would die quiet. The people would leave this place. The grandfather's bones would lie under someone else's grass. Or he could stay. And the rifle would speak. He stayed. The first shot came fast, crack sharp against the canyon walls. The bullet clipped his left shoulder, tore cloth, and skin burned a shallow furrow across the muscle. Blood bloomed dark on the shirt. Talon staggered half a step, caught himself. The pain arrived late, hot and bright, but he did not drop. Did not reach for any weapon. He simply straightened again, feet planted wider, blood dripping slow onto the dirt. Vance lowered his own pistol a fraction. Damn fool. Adeline started forward, quick, instinctive, but Vance's voice stopped her cold. Stay there, ma'am. This don't concern you. Talon turned his head once, just enough to meet her eyes, then back to Vance. The men held their aim. The wind carried the copper smell of blood, now mixing with dust and alkali. Talon spoke, then a quiet, steady the words carrying clear across the open ground. She is mine now. Respect her name. He did not look at Adeline as he said it. He did not need to. The claim hung between them all like smoke from a fresh kill. Vance's mouth twisted. He glanced at Tuck, then back at Talon. For a long beat, no one moved. Then Vance spat into the dirt. Get your things, he told the others. We'll finish this another day. They backed off, slow rifles, still up eyes, never leaving Talon. Vance lingered longest, watching, calculating, then turned and walked away last. As he passed Adeline, he leaned close, voice low enough that only she and Talon heard. This ain't over. They mounted up and rode out, dust trailing behind like a promise. Talon stood where he was. Blood soaked his sleeve, dripping steady onto the cracked earth. The pool reflected the dying light, smaller now, darker. Adeline took one step toward him, then another. She stopped short, basket forgotten at her feet. Talon did not speak again. He only looked at her long, steady, then turned his head toward the ridge, where the camp lay hidden. The wind picked up, carrying the faint sound of a child coughing far off. He started walking uphill slow, one hand pressed to the wound. Blood marked his path in small, dark drops. Behind him, Adeline remained standing by the spring, watching him go. The canyon held its breath. The moon had risen thin and cold by the time Talon reached the camp. Blood had darkened his sleeve to black, stiffening the cloth against his skin. Each step pulled at the shallow furrow across his shoulder, fresh pain mixing with the old ache of walking alone. The fire in the center had burned down to Cole's red eyes glowing low. No one greeted him. The wiki-ups stood silent canvas walls, breathing in and out with the wind. Sage waited outside the nearest one blanket, wrapped tight a small tin cup of water in her hands. She did not rush forward. She only stepped aside to let him pass, eyes dropping to the wound, then lifting to his face. No questions. She knew. He ducked inside. The air was close, heavy with the smell of willow bark and sickness. The boy lay on the pallet, breathing ragged skin, hot under the thin blanket. Talon lowered himself to sit against the wall, careful not to jar the shoulder. Sage knelt beside him, set the cup down, and reached for a clean strip of cloth from her basket. Her fingers worked without tremor, tearing, folding, pressing the cloth to the wound. Blood soaked through almost at once. She pressed harder. Talon exhaled through his nose. The pain flared bright, then dulled to a steady burn. He let her work. Outside, soft footsteps approached. The girl, the witness, slipped through the opening, blanket clutched in both fists. She stopped just inside, eyes wide in the dim light of the single candle. Sage glanced at her, then back to the bandage. The girl spoke, first voice small but steady. I saw him on the ridge. He stood in the path. The white men pointed guns. He did not move. Sage's hands paused. She did not look up. Talon kept his eyes on the low flame. The girl waited. When no one answered, she added, he said words. To the woman who gathers plants. He said she belongs to him now. Sage tied the bandage tight. Her fingers lingered a moment on the knot, then withdrew. She rose and walked to the boy, adjusting his blanket without speaking. The cough came again, deep, wet, ending in a small gasp. Talon shifted against the wall. The movement pulled fresh blood through the cloth. He pressed his palm to it, feeling the warmth seep between his fingers. Stone appeared in the opening, then old shoulders filling the space. He did not enter. He only stood looking down at Talon with eyes that had seen too many winters. "You brought this on us," Stone said. Quiet, flat. By standing where white men could see you. By speaking their tongue in their place. Talon met the old man's gaze. No defense rose in his throat. None would change the truth. Stone continued. "The spring is gone. One branch already dry. The children cough blood. The grandfathers do not rest." He paused. "You will not join the next ceremony. Your place is no longer here until the people decide." The words settled like dust after a hard ride. Sage's back stiffened, but she did not turn. The girl looked from Stone to Talon, then down at her own feet. Stone stepped back into the night. The canvas flap fell closed behind him. Sage remained kneeling by the boy. She reached for the tin cup, dipped her fingers, and touched them to the child's lips. The boy swallowed once weakly. Talon watched her. He wanted to speak, to say the spring could still be saved, that the white men would come back, that he had only done what the ground demanded. But the words stayed locked behind his teeth. Speaking them now would only widen the crack already running through the camp. Sage rose at last. She walked to him, stopped close enough that he could smell the sage on her hands again. "You should rest," she said. He nodded once. She turned away but paused at the flap. "The girl will stay with the boy tonight." She left without another word. Talon sat alone in the dim light. The candle flame guttered, throwing long shadows across the wicky-up walls. Outside, the wind carried the faint sound of voices, low, urgent from the far side of camp. Someone was speaking of leaving this place, of finding new ground before winter came. He closed his eyes. The wound throbbed, steady, a reminder that could not be ignored. Far off toward Redstone Gulch, a thin line of lantern light flickered in the dark. Word would reach the town by morning. Vance Crow would make sure of it. Talon opened his eyes again. The candle burned lower. The boy coughed once more, longer this time. Somewhere in the night, a rumor was already taking shape. The Apache and the white woman who gathered plants had worked some charm together. Children on both sides were sick because of it. The camp did not sleep easy. Neither did Talon. The night came down black and close, no moon to soften the edges. Talon walked the dry wash, a lone coat left behind, and camp shirt sleeves rolled against the lingering heat of the day. The wound on his shoulder throbbed steady, a dull pulse under the bandage Sage had tied. Blood had crusted the cloth stiff. Every step pulled it open a fraction more. He did not stop to check it. Smoke reached him first, sharp, oily, carrying the smell of burning grass and creosote. He crested the lower ridge and saw it orange light, flickering low along the canyon mouth, where the last of the burial stones lay scattered under scrub. Flames licked upward, greedy on the dry thatch. Vance Crow stood silhouetted against the glow, Tuck Riley and Boone Webb feeding the fire with armloads of dead brush. They moved, quick, practiced, not speaking. This was not murder. This was erasure. Burn the ground, clean, leave no trace of bones or markers, let the town whisper of Apache curses when the sickness spread. Talon stopped at the ridge's lip. The heat pressed against his face, drying the sweat on his brow. He watched from the dark, breath-shallow hands loose at his sides. The fire had already taken the nearest stones, blackening them, cracking the old flat surfaces where grandfathers had been laid to rest. The smell of charred bone drifted up, faint but unmistakable. Talon's stomach turned once hard. He swallowed it down. The girl, the witness, crouched in the shadows, 20 paces to his left. Blanket pulled over her head. She had followed again, silent as always. Her eyes caught the firelight, wide and unblinking, fixed on the men below. She did not move toward him. She only watched. Talon felt her gaze like a second weight on his back. The flames spread fast across the brittle grass. One tongue reached a low mound, the last unmarked place, and the fire took it whole. A small pop sounded like dry wood splitting, and a fragment of bone rolled free white against the black char. Vance kicked dirt over it without looking down. Talon's right hand flexed, once fingers curling. He could stay here. Let the fire finish. The camp would leave this ground tomorrow or the next day. The grandfathers would be gone forever, their rest broken, their names safer in silence than in memory. Or he could go down, and the rifles waiting in the saddles would answer. He went down. The slope was loose. Shale slid under his boots. He did not run. He walked straight into the light shadow long behind him. Vance saw him first, head snapping up, hand dropping to the pistol. Tuck and Boone froze, then reached for rifles slung across their backs. Talon did not stop. He walked past the burning grass to the mound where the bone had rolled free. Flames licked at his boots. He knelt, reached through the heat skin blistering on his forearm, and closed his fingers around the small white fragment. It was warm, almost hot. He pulled it to his chest, shielding it with his body. A shot cracked. The bullet tore through his upper arm, same side as the shoulder, reopening the old furrow. Blood sprayed dark across the dirt. Talon staggered but did not fall. Pain roared up his arm, white-hot, stealing breath. He stayed kneeling, clutching the bone against his ribs. Vance lowered the pistol slow. Crazy son of a bitch. Talon rose. Blood ran down his sleeve in steady streams, dripping onto the burning grass. The fire hissed where it touched. He turned his back, deliberate, slow, and started up the slope again. No glance at Vance. No word. The men did not fire again. They watched him go, flames roaring higher behind them. Talon reached the ridge. The girl was still there, blanket fallen from her head. She stared at the blood on his shirt, at the small white thing he held pressed to his chest. She did not speak. She only looked long, steady, then turned and slipped back toward camp, footsteps swallowed by the night. Talon stood alone on the crest. The fire below burned brighter now, consuming what little remained. Smoke rose thick, blotting the stars. He opened his hand. The bone fragment lay in his palm, small, cracked, still warm. He closed his fingers around it again. Blood dripped between them, dark and slow. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke toward the camp. Somewhere in the distance, a child coughed sharp final. Talon started walking. The fragment stayed in his fist. The night closed behind him. Dawn came slow and thin, a pale line bleeding across the eastern rim rock. Talon walked the last stretch to camp with the small charred bone fragment clutched in his fist, blood from his arm drying in dark streaks down his sleeve. The pain had settled into a deep, steady ache that matched the rhythm of his steps. Smoke from the night's fire still hung low over the wickiups, mixing with the sour smell of sickness and the faint alkali dust lifted by the morning wind. Sage stood outside the central wickiup, blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. The girl, the witness, waited beside her, small hands folded in front of her dress. They did not move when they saw him. They only watched faces still in the gray light. Talon stopped a few paces away. He opened his hand. The bone lay in his palm, blackened at the edges, cracked from heat but whole. He held it out to Sage without speaking. She took it carefully, fingertips brushing his. Her eyes lifted to the fresh wound on his arm and then to his face. She said nothing. The girl stepped closer, staring at the fragment as if it might speak. From the far side of camp came the sound of horses being saddled, quiet, deliberate. Stone appeared between two wickiups, leading a small string of pack animals. Behind him, a dozen others moved in silence, women bundling blankets, men rolling canvas, children clinging to skirts. No one looked toward Talon. They moved like people who had already decided the ground beneath them was no longer theirs. A thin wail rose from one of the wickiups, the mother of the youngest boy. The child had stopped breathing sometime in the night. The sound cut sharp, then faded into low keening. Sage's shoulders drew in tighter. She did not turn. Stone mounted his horse without a word. He rode past the central fire pit, past Talon, eyes fixed straight ahead. The others followed in single file, leading their burdens. No farewell, no glance back. The dust rose behind them in a slow cloud, settling on the empty places they left. Sage remained where she was. The girl stayed close to her side. Talon looked at the fragment in Sage's hand, then at the empty camp wickiups, sagging now without people to hold them up, fire pit cold the ground, already feeling abandoned. He spoke, then, voice low, rough from smoke and blood loss. "Take it," he said. "Carry it. Let the grandfathers remember we were still Apache." Sage closed her fingers around the bone. She looked at him a long moment, eyes steady, no tears, no anger. Only the weight of what had been lost. She nodded once. The girl reached out, touched Sage's wrist lightly. Then both turned and started walking slow, deliberate toward the trail the others had taken. Sage did not look back. The girl did once, small face pale in the rising light, and then kept walking. Talon stood alone in the center of what had been camp. Wind moved through the empty wickiups, flapping canvas like loose skin. The smell of old smoke lingered, undercut now by the faint copper of his own blood. Far below toward Redstone Gulch, lantern lights still burned in a few windows. Word had already spread, whispers in the saloon in the feed store. The Apache and the woman who gathered plants had worked some dark medicine together. Children were dying because of it. Cole Barrett had spoken to Rafe Dalton that morning, voice low, insistent, "Keep the town quiet, keep the land." Dalton had listened, hat in hand, jaw tight. He had not answered. Talon felt the wind shift, carrying the distant sound of hooves, slow, purposeful, headed up from the flats. He pressed his good hand to the wound on his arm. Blood welled fresh between his fingers. He did not move. The camp stood empty behind him. The trail ahead lay open, empty now, dust settling slow. He stayed where he was. The sun bled low across the rim rock, turning the canyon walls the color of old rust. Talon stood alone on the high ground above the spring boots, planted in cracked earth arms, loose at his sides. Blood from the night before had dried black on his shirt. The shoulder wound had crusted over, pulling tight with every breath. The fragment of bone was gone, carried away by Sage and the girl. But its weight lingered in his palm like a ghost impression. Below, Vance Crow waited on the flat where the ditch had been abandoned. Tuck Riley stood beside him, rifle cradled. Boone Webb a pace back with a pistol loose in his hand. No words passed between them. The fire from the night before still smoldered in patches of blackened grass, thin smoke curling upward like a slow curse. The spring lay empty now, only a dark stain in the gravel alkali crust, flaking white at the edges. Talon started down the slope. Gravel shifted under his boots, small sounds swallowed by the wind. Vance saw him, first head, tilting hand, drifting to the pistol at his belt. Tuck raised his rifle, slow barrel steady. Boone followed suit. Talon reached the flat and stopped 10 paces out. No weapon drawn, no demand spoken. He simply stood broad still between them and the dry spring. Vance's mouth twisted. "You don't learn, do you?" Talon did not answer. The wind carried the faint smell of char and blood. Smoke drifted between them, thin and gray. Vance drew his pistol. The hammer clicked back sharp final. Tuck's rifle followed. Boone's hand tightened on the grip. From the left movement, Adeline Hargrove stepped from the shadow of the canyon mouth basket, forgotten in her hand dark dress catching the last slant of light. She had come for herbs again one last time. She stopped short when she saw the rifle's breath catching once visible in the cooling air. Rafe Dalton appeared behind her hat, low hand resting on the butt of his own sidearm. He had followed her trail, or perhaps the smoke. He did not speak. He only watched. Vance glanced at Dalton, then back to Talon. "This ends now." He raised the pistol. The barrel leveled at Talon's chest. Talon did not move. The shot came fast, crack against the canyon walls. The bullet struck Talon's right shoulder, high, tearing through muscle and bone. Pain exploded white, stealing breath. He staggered half a step, caught himself, blood blooming fresh across the old stains. He stayed on his feet. Adeline cried out small sharp and ran forward. Vance swung the pistol toward her. She reached Talon, threw herself between them, arms spread. The second shot went wild, grazing her upper arm, tearing cloth and skin. She gasped, stumbled, but did not fall. Talon's good hand came up slow, palm open, not reaching for a weapon. He stepped past Adeline, placing himself between her and the barrel again. Vance hesitated. The pistol wavered. Dalton spoke then, quiet, steady. "Enough." He stepped forward, hand on his own gun. Vance looked at him long, calculating, then lowered the pistol slow. Talon stood bleeding, breath ragged. The smoke from the old fire drifted past his face, stinging his eyes. Vance spat into the dirt. "Take him," he said to Tuck. But Tuck did not move. Boone's eyes flicked to Dalton. Dalton walked up slow. "You're done, Crow." He reached for the cuffs at his belt. Vance stared at him a long beat, then let the pistol drop to his side. Dalton took it, and then the rifle from Tuck. No resistance, no words. Talon watched it happen. Blood dripped steady from his shoulder onto the cracked earth. Adeline pressed her hand to her own wound cloth, already red, but she did not speak. When Dalton led Vance away, hands bound, Tuck and Boone trailing silent, Talon turned. He did not look back. He started up the slope toward the high ground steps, slow, deliberate. Blood marked his path in dark drops. The wind picked up, carrying smoke and the faint smell of alkali. Far off on the ridge's far side, the girl stood alone. Blanket clutched in one hand, the charred bone fragment in the other. She watched him go, small, still eyes, wide, unblinking. She did not call out. She did not follow. Talon reached the crest. The canyon lay behind him, dry, empty, the spring gone forever. The land stretched ahead, barren, unchanging. He kept walking into the gathering dark. No glance back. No word spoken. The high ground swallowed him whole. The girl remained where she was, small against the sky. She held the fragment tight. She remembered. "Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Thank you for listening. If this story has touched your heart, I invite you to stay with us to discover more true tales of the Wild West. Stories that honor resilience, tenderness, and the spirit that God placed in those who blaze the trail. Subscribe, share. Leave your thoughts in the comments and join us once again to journey across this untamed land. Thank you. Aviso legal/disclaimer. These stories are crafted purely for entertainment and may contain imaginative additions or dramatic interpretations inspired by old frontier eras. We use AI-based resources, voice imagery, and drafting as part of our creative process. But every final detail is carefully reviewed and shaped by human effort to preserve emotional depth and authenticity. We strictly follow YouTube's rules regarding AI-generated content and refrain from deepfakes, altered identities, or misleading representations. All images, sounds, and related materials are lawfully obtained. Please do not reuse, modify, or distribute any portion of this content without written permission. Thank you for valuing creativity, respect, and original work.